Go ahead.
Finkelstein
Okay.
files.
Oh, God.
This is Live from the Table, the official podcast of the world-famous Comedy Cellar, coming at you on Sirius XM 99 Rock Comedy, babe. Also available as a podcast, and we're on YouTube as well for that multimedia experience. You get to see us, you get to hear us. And we have with us today, well, first of all, Noam Dorman is here, as always.
Present.
The owner and the proprietor of the world-famous Comedy Cellar. Periel Aschenbrand joins us,
Hola.
as always. And, of course, me. I am a Comedy Cellar regular, not as regular as in years past, but you know what? That's on me. I chose originality over the easy laugh. I assume that. My bad. We have with us two amazing guests, friends of the Comedy Cellar. Coleman Hughes is with us.
Hello.
Coleman is the author of The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America. He's sick of talking about it, but maybe if we're very nice and ask nicely, he will talk about it with us tonight.
Fresh off his appearances on The View, where he skewered The View ladies, and on Joe Rogan.
Mm-hmm.
We also have with us a vape aficionado and host of the Fifth Column podcast, Michael Moynihan. M squared for his close friends. And I don't know what we're talking about, but Noam has things in mind.
Well, okay, so first of all, I just want to tell you, I've been drinking that Fernet lately.
Yeah, you like that.
But it hangs me over, whatever the... I had two of them, and I'm feeling very...
Today or last night?
I had two last night, and
It's 5 o'clock. And you're hungover?
I wouldn't call it hungover. Like, I don't have a headache.
Yeah.
But I feel that kind of slightly, dehydrated.
Yeah, it's hungover.
Slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like it. But I could do
stop drinking it.
I could do like
What's
5
in
shots
Fernet?
of vodka. What's that?
What's in Fernet? What is that?
Well, it has no sugar.
Supposedly.
And
Those are supposed to be worse for hangovers than clear liquors, I think, right?
yeah, it's a brown. But anyway, but I know Michael likes it. So that's
I like it. Yeah.
So if I'm a little sluggish, that's that. Second of all, I'm getting sued. I just got served just before the show started.
Is that a cease and desist?
Desist?
Cease and desist.
Can you spell desist?
Cease and desist.
Oh, is it desist?
Yeah. Wow.
It's a law school.
Well, we didn't talk about cease and desist.
I was absent that day.
Can you get a letter just to desist? Like if you've already ceased?
He's gonna keep going. He's gonna. Yeah.
It's a deceased and desist. Okay. All right. Anyway, so yeah, so I do this other podcast with Hot Tim, and
Yes.
I do it because Hot Tim had a heart transplant and he really wanted to do a show. So I said, sure, of course I'll do the podcast. He said,
Wait, hold on. You do a show with him because he had a heart transplant?
well, I didn't
you
want to
do
say
it
no to him.
Okay, so if anyone has an injury, they can come to you and get a show.
And he's a good friend of mine,
Yeah,
and he gets good guests.
Yeah.
And I let him put it on the Comedy Cellar website because gets attention for him, whatever it is. And no good deed goes unpunished, as the Jews say.
Yeah.
So now I'm getting sued because he apparently used a copyrighted image for 20 seconds on something. I don't know how he used it.
On a video.
On a video.
I think I got that on my podcast once.
Yeah. So
Similar situation.
and he cut and pasted an image. So now I'm getting sued.
No, but typically, don't they tell you to take it down, and then they give you a little bit of leeway?
Desist. They will not let me desist.
Then you're not desisting.
You cannot resist or desist.
Yes.
And they want $35,000.
What is the image of?
It's an image of. This is the image. I
see
don't want to show it.
Yeah, don't show it. Do I have to pay if I look at it? What the fuck is that image?
Yeah, nice tits, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Can you describe the image? I mean, it looks like it's
So-
from a body camera or something.
all right. So that's it. So that's I'm going to try to keep it together. So here's the first thing. There was a thing in the news yesterday apparently about. Well, actually, we have a special guest today. Mr. Norman Finkelstein is here. And
I'm not warmed up.
we heard that. I heard that yesterday there was something went on at Emory University. Something went on at Emory University, and you walked out. What happened?
Professor Dorman, there was lying in Hamas supporting. I support Hamas too. But I had to lie and walk out. That's why he walked out, right? Because I saw this briefly, that there was a guy on stage who was praising the October 7th attacks. And I said, I have been in this very studio and heard that, but just in a different timbre. In the slower...
I think they were saying...
Well, I'll tell you what Finkelstein said. he said that he didn't have it in him to condemn the attacks.
No, but
Yeah,
Emery-
And liking it to Nat Turner's
No, he
rebellion.
said his heart was filled with joy.
With joy, yeah, and it's resistance, like.
But in Emery, I think another speaker started talking about the Zionists control everything. The Zionists.
Yeah, one of the other ones was this guy who's come out of nowhere. This very mysterious guy named Jackson Hinkle.
Yeah.
Do you know who this guy is?
Oh, he's the worst.
He's the worst. He just is this guy who shows up and he spoke. The funniest thing is I saw an image on Twitter of him speaking via video link to a conference of Houthis in Yemen. There's this picture of this guy who's like some guy, random guy from Southern California who loves Russia and, Assad and, but he refers to himself as a communist, I think, but he was
A MAGA communist.
a MAGA communist. That's right. How did you know that?
I looked it up.
Okay. That's a little too much information about Jackson Henkel. But he was up there with this other guy, and I didn't see, because I tried to find the speech online. Nobody seemed to have posted it. But, they came up there and said, that October 7th was glorious.
Well, Norman,
Yeah.
this is the thing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but online, they're turning on you.
Oh, God, are they?
So here are some of the tweets that went on about you
Yeah.
after you backed out of that thing. It says, so he's been a Zionist Jew all along.
I have been a Jew. I live out in Brooklyn, and my parents were in the camps. But a camp is like Gaza. It's very similar. Let's stick to the facts. You always have to throw that one in.
Your imbecility.
Yeah, your imbecility knows no boundaries.
These non-Zionist Jews are showing their true colors now. Eventually, these are each individual tweets. Eventually, they take their own side. He's showing the real
Their
Jew.
own side.
Finkelstein was always playing the role of the Jewish gatekeeper. Finkelstein, huh? Jewish fragility. Surprise, a Jew being Jewish. Well, he's Jewish.
Yeah.
I've been suspicious of this guy ever since I found out 15 years ago he had a disagreement with John Mearsheimer over the cause of the Iraq War. Finkelstein contends that the Israel lobby was not behind the war.
I mean, he's right about that, right? I mean, he also made people angry a number of years ago for opposing BDS, the boycott, divest, sanction movement. But it wasn't for the reason that it's just stupid and immoral. I mean, he said the same thing. He went up to Colombia. Did you see the speech he gave on the campus of Columbia? And it was to like a kind of cold and stony silence in which he was saying, I think he was saying from the river to the sea is not going to win friends.
That's right.
He was advising people. He wasn't saying it was wrong. He wasn't saying, he's like, I love Israel. No, he was like, this is just bad for us. And everyone was just sitting there and said nothing.
No, but he actually doesn't believe from the river to the sea. He believes that the partition.
he doesn't? Oh, I don't know.
He believes that the partition was correct.
Yes.
He told me that personally. And
He's
I've
made
heard
that
it-
clear elsewhere, too.
Yes, he absolutely does.
So 48 is fine with him.
Yes, 48's fine with him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
What about, but 67 is not fine.
It's a partition is fine with him.
He believes the
okay.
partition was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So,
I try not to pay too much attention.
but here's something interesting. Then I have a bunch of things to talk about. And Imperial wants to do something also. There's like 10 nasty anti-Semitic tweets about Norman Finkelstein, which is probably the sum total of all the anti-Arabic tweets that become the corpus of the case against the Jews for their bigotry. And it's just a good illustration of how in this day and age you can literally find a critical mass to convince people that any people believe anything from any angle.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of post-truth
That's kind of like a
situation.
pure test case because Finkelstein is the paradigm case of a Jew who checks the box of every anti-Israel position, almost every anti-Israel position you can take, and yet still is subject in some corners to what must be pure, unfiltered, unmixed anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah. It's almost as if you scratch the surface of these people.
Yes, they might. Let's just very gently say the Overton window has shifted. It's moved a little bit towards the Goebbels end.
So I sent Finkelstein an email.
About this?
Yes, and I said, look at how these anti-Semites are talking about you.
Did he respond?
He didn't respond, but I know that he's opened it a number of times. I know it.
As a journalist, always use an email tracker and always presume somebody has an email tracker too.
And by the way, use an email pixel blocker on your Chrome.
When a friend of mine, this is a true story, a friend of mine told me recently that, and if he's listening to this, he'll know who he is, that an old email to a girlfriend who he had this horrible breakup with, he said, she's really into me because she keeps on reopening this email, and realized that there was something that that was like indexing his emails. And he thought that she was going back and being like, I really miss this guy. And it's like, no, that was the index.
It could also have been that she was forwarding it to her friends.
Yeah, hilariously forwarding it to her friends.
Because it'll ping every time. All right, so before we get to the stuff, so Periel did a lot of work. She's never done any work for a show we've ever done before. And she did all this work because she wants you guys to do dueling Finkelsteins.
No, what I want to do is, and I've highlighted it.
Table read.
It's in the realm of courtesy if somebody writes you an email and says strict confidentiality.
Yeah.
No, I believe I asked him somewhere in that pile, is it okay if I share these emails? And he answered, no.
Okay, well, you know what? You don't get to call somebody a, quote, sick sack of shit under the guise of strict confidentiality. Okay?
Was that Noam that he was calling that?
Who else?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, that's my
Now,
line.
Before we just go full hog on this, I just want to say, I am still not anti-Norman Finkelstein.
I understand that.
I feel, I compared him yesterday, I feel like him as Luke felt about Darth Vader.
Okay,
I
look.
feel there's good in him. I can feel it.
Okay.
You have been on. I want to point out quickly though that Noam has been on this for a very long time. That no matter what he says, he's like, well, you know,
Yeah,
and
it's
like
awful.
you really
It's outrageous.
want to be friends with him.
I
don't
would
you?
like-
Except that he refused to take the stage with the people who were bashing Israel in a way that he didn't agree with.
Yeah.
Khalidi wouldn't have done that. There is something about him which does distinguish him in that way.
I would like
Michael, are you in accord with that assessment that he has good in him?
When I met him very briefly, he he had no interest in me. And by the way, I hadn't seen this, but the top email here has my name in quotes followed by a question mark, which is the funniest thing. I mean, I'll give you credit, Finkelstein, for that. He's like, who the fuck is this guy?
I would like to direct everybody to page 5.
Well, but I haven't gotten my answer from.
No, I was saying, and when I met him, you usually try when you meet someone, even if you disagree with them on almost everything, try to find that common thing. And I said that he wrote a book a long time ago that I enjoyed. And he looked at me, he's like, thank you. And that was it. It was not like an engagement at all. But so I think he's not a dumb guy, obviously. He's a talented guy. But I think that it's become a bit of a performance at this point.
What about Mate and...
Hey, I am just like Noam in this one. I know Aaron a little bit, and I like him. He's come on our podcast multiple times and really gone at it with me, and I respect the fact that he would do that. And so, look, you have terrible views. I'll debate you on the terrible views. I'm not going to say I'm not going to associate with you because of them. As long as you'll come on and talk to me about it, I'm fine.
Listen, on the question of these Mate guys, I know. How do I put this? I don't know how you guys feel about me on this. I've gotten some resistance over the last 6 months, but I think in a certain way I might have won the argument. These guys like Mate and Blumenthal, as much as we don't like them, we have to admit that they were the only ones who got certain things right. And I think it's very unbecoming to not respect that in some way. Like I can, whatever's motivating them, whatever motivates me, whatever it is, on certain issues, if not for them, the general story would be inaccurate. And I have a certain respect for that, which is more important than psychoanalyzing him or whatever it is. So I just hold my fire on guys like that, as opposed to guys who are lying or whatever it is. I mean, yes, they allied things. So do some of the very important advocates on my side of this issue. I see it all the time. Where
No, I mean, it's part of the conversation. I know Coleman's had this conversation a number of times. I think we've talked about it, of this idea of not platforming people. I mean, I've had this. I mean, I had somebody at my old company get angry, and not to me, but it got back to me that when I interviewed Steve Bannon, they were uncomfortable. This was during the 2020 campaign, to which I responded, number one, he ran Trump's campaign in 2016. This guy is a relevant person, a relevant voice in MAGA world. And they were upset about platforming him. And as I pointed out, we used to call that interviewing them. We have to talk to them. How do you know that this is a bad person? Because you've heard them. Somebody put them on air. Somebody debated them. You need to do that. You can't just presume somebody's a bad person. So I'm perfectly happy to talk to all these people. And one final thing is I think a really unfair thing to Finkelstein, despite the fact that there's a sheaf of emails here insulting me, is that he has sometimes called a Holocaust denier, which I think is insane, and it's not true. But here's the thing, and I'm not comparing him, I'm not comparing Mate, any of these people to Holocaust deniers. David Irving, the very famous Holocaust denier historian, during the trial with Deborah Lipstadt and these people who, he called him a Holocaust denier, which he is, there are all these historians who came and said, he's actually made some contributions to history because Nazis trust him. He speaks German well, and he's kind of ferreted out these documents that actually have broadened our knowledge of Nazism, but his conclusions are batshit crazy. So ultimately, there is some utility in a guy like that. And so I think that's probably true. And again, not comparing these people. Irving's in my head now because I just saw some news story that he's apparently on death's door. But yeah, I think there's some utility in some of the stuff. I just think overall, their analysis is very, very wildly wrong.
I think what gets under people's skin is when you interview one of these people and you seem like you guys are friends. You seem friendly. Hey, good. You have a band that's friendly.
People do hate that. Yeah, that's true.
Can I say one more thing about Mate? Because I don't want to let him totally off the hook. This thing about the sexual assaults, they have dug in on this issue.
Very odd.
In a way which seems to me at this point to not be grounded in reality. It seems to me, you guys probably follow it more closely
Just
than I
to
do.
let the listeners know, Aaron Mate is a guy that has said numerous times that there was no sexual assault on October 7th.
That has he said there was no sexual assaults, or
there was not a pattern?
It wasn't systemic. Yeah,
was not a weapon. He said various things at various times, and I do fault him again, like people on my own side. I fault the same thing. I fault him for, as the evidence became more persuasive, for not coming out and say, you know what, I think I was wrong about this. But I'll just give you an example. There was that story going around about the Israelis or some pro-Israel protester was stabbed in the eye with a Palestinian flag.
Yeah.
It turned out not to be true.
Yeah.
And I know a number of people who talked about it.
I think I might have casually repeated that too, which I later realized, later by being today, I actually saw a video of it this morning. Yeah.
So many people did that. And I don't expect to see many of them correcting the record on that. And like I know I would. So it happens on both sides. So I don't want to let Mate off the hook. And clearly he does have some deep animosity for the issue, for Israel. And having said that, if I email Mate with something he got wrong, he will read it. He will answer, yeah, you're right about that. How about this? Him and Finkelstein, they do stay within certain rules and I like that. You know what I'm talking about? I can have a constructive conversation with him.
Right.
With many people, I can't.
You think that the things that he said in these emails are...
So Mate Finkelstein?
I'm talking about Finkelstein. I want to read on page 5. Michael, if you want to read it in...
Please turn to page 5.
We just had a Passover Seder, and now this is like...
Yeah.
Your turn to read, Michael.
It's at the bottom
Hold on. I'm getting...
As for Mr. Coleman.
Well, where is this? At the bottom of
right
page
there,
5?
Right there.
It's not highlighted on
no,
my copy.
I didn't highlight it on yours. I highlighted on mine.
As for Mr. Coleman, he has carved out a lucrative niche in the podcast world as a black Shabbos goy pandering to Jewish supremacists.
Wow, he's good.
Okay.
Was that Moynihan or Coleman?
That was Coleman.
Oh, I was looking this way.
No, that was Coleman.
I
That was
thought
good.
that was Moynihan.
Okay, He can rap. He can play trumpet. He can do a...
How about you, Dan?
If Hughes, please read.
Should I read the same line?
No, if Hughes...
I'll try,
livelihood...
but I'm not an impression.
Oh, and then he goes, okay.
I write
Wait,
some...
Coleman.
Some people have accused me of writing the best jokes in the business, but no one's ever accused me of being an impressionist.
It's your turn, Dan. Come on, you got it.
Well, I do a better Jackie Mason.
If Hughes' livelihood wasn't dependent on pandering himself, perhaps he would have pondered, I know how this Coleman Hughes makes a living.
Now do it as Anthony Mason.
Come on.
All right, I'll try it as Finkelstein.
As for Mr. Coleman...
Did we read
Where are we
No,
going back
he's
to
reading.
the
Yeah, I thought you
original?
were reading the,
As for Mr. Coleman,
We just did this part. Are
he
we
has
competing?
Perel's a terrible director.
I thought you wanted him to reread the same thing.
It's going to be a very tough edit.
I gotta get a running start. My parents were in Majdanek, He has carved out a lucrative niche in the podcast world as a black Shabbos goy pandering to Jewish supremacists. Nah, that's not good.
Not good. Okay. Can we get off this now?
Well, but Jim,
No, I want you to.
all right, I think it's enough, Periel, though.
I can hear the sponsors.
Yeah. You have sponsors? I didn't think so.
I think what you're getting at with Mate and Blumenthal is we're always looking for people who we strongly disagree with, but who play by the rules of intellectual engagement, meaning what you say has to be backed by evidence, no ad hominems, play by the rules that we all try to play by. And I think you, Norman, and I also have seen Norman as someone who generally does play by the rules, even having what many people see as an extreme point of view. And so we expected to meet that person over email as well, right? You expect someone to play by the same set of rules privately and publicly. And so numerous times in this email chain, one being right here, he just showed himself to be a totally different person. So for example, I think I've done precisely 3 podcasts in the history of my podcast on the topic of Israel out of, I don't know, 150 or something, right? So to say I've carved out a lucrative niche for myself as a black Shabbos goy, meaning like a black person that does the bidding of the Jews, does the dirty work of the Jews.
That's nice work if you can get it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that if someone paid me for it.
It's ad hominem, it's nasty, and there's actually no evidence for it.
Right.
I would say one of the things that I've noticed probably since October 7th. I mean, it's been happening for a couple of years now, longer than that. But on the 5th column, we've had a bunch of guests who disagree with, mostly myself and Matt on Israel. I mean, Camille's kind of generally on the same page too, but is not as invested, I guess, as the two of us are. And we've gotten a lot of really angry emails about it. Like, why are you not platforming, but why are you having this idiot on? He's wrong about X, Y, and Z. And to have Finkelstein here, to have Khalidi here, to have Cornell West and Finkelstein do something at the Comedy Cellar. That strikes people as very odd these days, particularly when you see these campus protests and they're asking people when they come in, they're checkpoints. They have checkpoints. And they're saying, well, are you a Zionist? What do you believe? You can't come in here unless you believe the same thing as me. I saw a lot of protests when I was on campus, and people were crazy and people said stupid things, but they generally engaged with you. And it seems to be maybe a generational thing that engagement with people who really disagree with you or have, in my estimation, pretty crazy views is considered a radical act, which I don't think is a radical act. I think that's something that, whatever you think of Piers Morgan and his show, which is a bit shouty and a bit cable newsy for me, he does have constantly has people on who are totally the opposite of him.
Right.
And it makes good television and occasionally very good debate too. I see we seem to have lost that in a way.
Now, would you agree that part of what motivates people like us is that we're also extremely curious?
Yes.
Like, part of the reason I want to talk to these people, even to see Cornel West, I'm actually enthralled, not just by their views. I'm also enthralled by just seeing Cornel West, the performer. I'm amazed to see how fluid he is, how he off the top of his head recalls all these things and makes these comparisons clever, very. And I just as a person who's always looking to be stimulated and have my curiosity satisfied and to be engaged, I'm drawn to these people because it's way more interesting than hearing yet another Israeli guy I agree with, blah, blah, blah about Israel. We all have it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do. I mean, I'm at the age I am, and I still think that I'm probably wrong about a lot of things, and I'm constantly challenging those things and reading books of people I disagree with. That's why it's so disconcerting to see these young people who literally know nothing. I mean, they're at university to learn. Yeah. They're not there to teach me. They're trying to teach me, on their microphone and with their keffiyehs on. It's like, you have a lot to learn, and you might end up in the same place. That's totally fine. That's very, very possible. But, assuming that you know everything is just, it's a worthless enterprise and boring, too.
Can I ask you, Coleman, whoever wants to answer, are there any views that you hold that you would have it would be very painful of you to abandon?
Let Coleman go first on that one.
Oh, well, yeah. No, I was going to say for me, it's less about seeing the performance, although that stuff is impressive, and more about just the worry that they may know something really important that I don't know. Yeah. You only have one lifetime. I'm not any, we're not all Tyler Cowen. So we can't read. The rest of us can't read every book. So that's
He's working his way through every book.
yeah,
Tyler.
yeah. But yeah, it's just, I think it's what was it? I think it's what Noam Chomsky said to Tyler Cowen when he asked, "Why do you respond to every email?" I know you remember this, and he said, "I take people seriously." Just you should take people seriously, even if they're kind of clowns, because actually sometimes clowns, are broken clocks that are right twice a day, and they might know something you don't. So that's why. That's the attitude I feel when I encounter someone that I strongly disagree with. I'm like, I'm actually listening to you.
I learned a lot from Finkelstein, actually, and it's the old cliche that when you have to listen to someone you disagree with,
You sharpen up
what
your
you
own
actually
arguments.
believe.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
whatever arguments I can make about Israel now, it's in no small part from dealing with Norman Finkelstein, from checking his footnotes, from
That's right.
not from Rashid Khalidi.
Yeah.
You can't even check a Rashid Khalidi footnote. You hit a brick wall. But Finkelstein and his footnotes are accurate. Anyway,
They're accurate, but they're not the full picture of certain things, right?
he leaves stuff out.
Leave stuff out. And I think that, by the way, that's people used to ask me all the time because I've done so many stories about plagiarism and plagiarists, and people would always say, well, what do you do? What program? This is 10, 15 years ago, before these kind of plagiarism programs existed. And I would say, I don't do programs, but I check people's footnotes often, particularly when I'm reviewing books. I'm like, wait, where did that? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, they just stole that from there. That's typically how you find out that people are plagiarizing, is because you look at the footnotes. And I don't see people, Ann Coulter is a funny example. It's just like, my book has 50,000 footnotes or whatever. It's like, well, are they good footnotes? Do they go to somewhere that's actually respectable? Does it say what you're saying they say? Footnotes are meaningless, but when you actually chase those things down, whether it's Finkelstein or people like that, you do sometimes find out that they're bullshitting, and it leads you to different places that are oftentimes very interesting.
I was the obsessive compulsive in me tried to read through all the footnotes for the Oppenheimer biography.
Oh, the Kai Bird one?
Yeah, because I like to finish books I start, but there were so many footnotes I gave up. Anyway, can we get to my question?
But also, don't ever finish a book that you don't like. People do that. I used to do that. Abandon books that suck. You don't have
Same
enough
way with
time.
sex.
Yeah,
But
that's people usually abandoning me halfway through.
I want to ask Coleman a question about the protests. What?
Well, my question about views, that people dig into certain views because they have something. In many cases, they have a personal connection to a particular view.
Yeah.
Pretty much any view, I'm agnostic. If guns are good, guns are bad, abortion, whatever. But if somebody presented me with irrefutable evidence that Israel was the bad guy, I would find it very difficult to deal with it. I don't know that I might resist it. So my question was do you feel that you have any views like that?
I think to some extent, like any view you express publicly for long enough, there's a temptation to dig into it to save face. I don't think that can be avoided.
Yeah.
But the question is, what do you do in the face of that? Do you?
But in your public career, Hitchens always used to hate the phrase public intellectual. It's like, what are you, a private intellectual? But as a public intellectual, in that career, is there anything that you have either abandoned or greatly modified? And particularly, you're writing your book. You're digging deep into stuff.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's hard for me to answer in the abstract. I'm not really sure.
Not one thing that sticks out. For a certain generation, it was always a rock that was like, right. Oh, we really fucked that one up.
It might be easier to answer in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
I've really only been doing it for 5 years.
I know that when I don't know if I want to get bogged down in this. When Benny Morris first came out with like Rachi's Victims, when he unearthed all this evidence of bad things that Israel had done, which had been swept under the rug, people were in real time going through exactly what you described. People like my father, all through Israel, and it was a very difficult process for people to go through, and it separated the men from the boys. People like my father, they bucked up, and he said, "Yeah, that's true. I guess I got to admit that that's true. I guess I'm gonna have to integrate that into how I see the whole picture." And some people refused to admit it, and they faded away in some way. And what's interesting, of course, is that in the end, Benny Morris moved towards the people who had been most upset. All right, Coleman, what is your take now? How would you wrap up, however you want to talk about it, this whole chapter of protests, which seems to have come to an end today at Columbia anyway? Mm-hmm. What's your big take on that?
Yeah, so my take on it is that the campus culture is precisely the same as it was when I left it. It's just that there was no
He went to
major
Columbia.
war.
Yeah, you were at Columbia, right?
Yeah, there was no major war going on at that time. So none of it has surprised me at Columbia. Just the tenor of it, the level of vitriol, the level of, the tactics used. Most of the kids in question have close to zero real knowledge of the conflict. They have lots of confidence and they're having fun. They're feeling that glow of righteous indignation that human beings love to feel, but mostly they're deeply ignorant of the conflict. They've been sold it as a simple story of colonizer versus colonized people, which is the only moral language that they have. It's funny when you go back and, for instance, like read people that were on both sides of the slavery debate in 1840s and 50s, everyone frames their arguments in terms of Christian principles. It's like if the people that are for it because it's, it's what God wants, and the people that are against it because it's not what God wants. Similarly, the language that these kids have, the only moral framework they have is intersectionality, which is oppressor, oppressed, colonized, whiteness. That's all they have. That is that's the tool they bring when they're deciding whether something is good or bad in the world. So that's how they look at the Israel issue. This is why one of my, I think, disagreements with a lot of other people on Israel's side of the conflict is that I don't think anti-Semitism of the German style is the reason why these kids are siding so deeply. I think they have, though I think they may be developing anti-Semitism actually as a result of this whole chapter. It's really the colonizer-colonized thing, and they believe that this is the fight of their generation on that axis.
I agree with you that they're more turning a blind eye to the anti-Semitism of the people that they're getting into bed with than they are animated, many of them, by anti-Semitism. There's no one explanation. Do you guys have a feel for this? After all we've been through with Stefanik and Claudine Gay and all the back and forth, is there some rule that we all understand, a line that protests are now not allowed to cross? Can they call for ethnic cleansing in Israel? Like, is there, what are we left with after all this last 10 months or however long?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who we are. I mean, the administration, I have no idea which each school has different sets of policies. I mean, people who are very, very obsessed with the concept of hate speech and have been for a very long time, which is, not a category in American law. It is in European law. But if they are following those things, I imagine that would be the red line that you can't cross, calling for. And again, when it's kind of
Calling for what?
For something like From the River to the Sea, that's usually brought up, particularly in those Stefanik hearings, as a kind of backdoor way of saying getting all the Jews out of an area, which would be ethnic cleansing. And is that hate speech?
Well,
for me, I don't think about things. I'm perfectly happy for them to expose exactly who they are and say exactly what they
but let me
want.
tell you where I'm going with that. I agree with you. If that is the rule, then why did not the president of Columbia, hearing what was said, and not being able in good faith to say that she understood what they meant, why was it not her responsibility then to say, hold on, I want the leaders of the protests in my office. What do you mean when you say river to the sea? Because my responsibility is to know whether or not you're protesting for ethnic cleansing or not.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that, if that is the rule, wasn't that what she was supposed to do?
The problem with these people is that, there's two things, is that the hypocrisy of this, the things they're allowing people to get away with, provided they generally agree with their politics, is always the case, right? If it was, Coleman had a great Twitter thread that was, it wasn't even a thread, it was a very, very long post about somebody on campus, and I'll let you explain that because you did it very well, who said something that they didn't disagree with and caused some pretty big chaos in this person's life. But the thing is I don't want them to move things towards their mistakes. So for instance, I tweeted a long time ago during the Charlie Hebdo affair after those murders, they put the cover of the issue after the murders was a guy with a turban on. No one ever said it was Muhammad. That was not supposed to be Muhammad. And the Associated Press, I think it was the Associated Press or Reuters, refused to run it on their wire. And so, of course, I had to log in. I went to their photo wire and I looked up Piss Christ. there is Piss Christ. You can pay $250 and license it and have.
That's the Serrano.
The Andre Serrano caused a huge controversy. A crucifix dunked in urine. All of the Catholics. And
Nobody said it was urine, by the way, but go ahead.
Nobody said it was. Yeah, it was. It might have been Gatorade.
Lemonade.
Yeah, but I pointed this out in the wrong. They had the wrong response. They pulled that too.
Yeah.
No, I want you to include the other one. And this is what happens in situations like this. When people say like, well, as Coleman points out, and he can explain that this happened in the past, we should hold them to the same standards. I want all those standards to go away. I think these kids should learn and they should say this stuff publicly and hopefully be unmasked, like literally unmasked. And they can go out in public because Coleman, all of us have literal microphones and we have to be careful what we say because that will affect us down the line, whether we're writing for somebody else or whether advertisers. This happens to everybody. If you want to cover your face and say the most horrible things, if you're saying this in an uncovered way, it's your right to be covered up and say it. But I just think you should be able to say all of this stuff and not have any effect, with one exception. The exception is when it is like incitement in the way that protest leader who said Zionists should be killed. That as a university. That is, you're saying that people who have certain ideas, they should be met with death. That is a red line. I would say that is
Kanaya James or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Forget.
Kamani
James. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the point I made is that when I was at Columbia in December 2018, there was a white kid named Julian who was filmed going on a rant outside of Butler Library. Obviously, the video starts mid-rant, so we don't know quite what happened, but presumably he was in some kind of conversation. Somebody, as happens every day on Columbia's campus, said something denigrating about white men. And he responds, he might have been drunk, and he goes on this rant about how much he loves white men. White men invented civilization. We invented science. Oh, why do you think we're all so bad? And then, but he was careful to say, I don't hate any other group. I just love white men, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud of it, blah, blah, blah.
White people are the best thing that ever happened to the world. We built the modern world. Europeans. Built the modern world.
So the campus, everyone sees it within 24 hours. It goes completely viral on campus, universally denounced. Nobody defends him. And in fact, he got banned from Barnard's campus, even though it didn't happen on Barnard's campus, it happened on Columbia's campus. And nobody defended his right to say that. He didn't hurt anybody. He was just being annoying and I would say ethnocentric in a way that is...
Did he get kicked out of school?
I don't know that he got kicked out of school, but he got banned. He certainly got banned from Barnard's campus, which is strange because most Columbia students take some classes on Barnard's campus. I took many classes there. Anyway, the point I made was that when someone like me who defended him at the time says that I defend the activists today, I defend their right to say things like "from the river to the sea," globalize the Intifada, which to my ear strike me as violent, ethnic cleansing at the very least, support for ethnic cleansing at the least, but to their ear may have different meanings or no clear meaning because they're so ignorant. No one could call me a hypocrite, I think, for that defense. But the truth is everyone was silent on this kid, Julian von Abele, and a million other issues at the time. And so to think that they're suddenly discovering the virtues of unbridled free speech is absolutely the wrong understanding. They don't care about free speech. They haven't in a very long time. And what they care about is this Israel issue, and they'll weaponize every liberal principle selectively and cynically to further that aim.
Yeah.
Well, I just hope that we don't end up carving out, by never pinning it down, to make them say what it is that they mean.
Yeah.
I could just see a month from now, this dude says the same thing about white people and gets thrown off once again and say, how could you throw him off after what you let them say about Israel? Say, no, they were just protesting against war. They never said anything bigoted.
Right.
What comes out of their mouth is irrelevant. I mean, I'm
but I'm
an
saying,
extremist on the other side. What they're doing at the library and stuff, they should be kicked out.
At minimum, oh no, that's you have to have rules.
Yeah.
But at minimum, at least we should come out of this whole incident with some rules that these universities can be held to in the future. The next time they try to cancel a speaker or not allow a protest or all the shit they've been doing for years already. I was looking it up today. Brennan, the former CIA guy, was disinvited or was thrown off. Like nobody was able to speak at universities.
And he's the MSNBC CIA guy.
And you know, this notion, we believe in free speech, but also our right to make sure that no speaker is invited to the campus that we disagree with. It's not, you know, they pretend like it's just about protests. No, protests are not the category. Free expression is the category. Protests are within that. You can't just say, I believe in protests, but not, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So they need to, this will all be worth it if it means that there's a change now about what we can expect that is allowed on campuses in terms of free expression.
Yes.
No more disinviting, no more heckler's veto. No, you made your point. Now you got to live by it. But I don't think that's going to be the case at all.
No, I don't think so
I don't
either.
think so either.
I mean,
it'd be great.
and
In which case, they shouldn't allow the protests.
And if the president invited the leader of the protests to define what they mean by it from the river to the sea, it wouldn't work because she would just chant from the river to the sea and like break something in her office. You know, the conversation can't be had.
All right, but all right. So that's my feeling about it. I'm not satisfied that this was well played.
I mean, if it just in an individual level, if it makes some of these people rethink this idea of safety and safetyism on campus, that it's coming after you now, then maybe it'll be worth it in some sense. But you know, I said the library. It was not the library. You went to school there. It was the hall.
Hamilton. Yeah,
Hall.
I think that's a philosophy building.
Yeah, I mean, and good Lord, I mean, you see You see the result of that. You know, everything overturned. I mean, literally completely trashed the place, broke all the windows. Very kind of January 6th vibes in it, and it's like those people, particularly on a campus that is what 70, 80 grand a year, something like
I
that.
heard it was 90.
90. I mean, these are the privileged of the privileged. Kick them out and give it to people more
And
deserving.
then, of course, asking for food, deliver.
that was my favorite.
Humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid.
They also held a janitor hostage.
And I mean, in UCLA,
It's not hostage.
well, UCLA, there was a Jewish student who there were a couple of them, and one they trapped there for an hour. There's a video of it. I can't say that's exactly what happened because I didn't see the whole thing. But and I'll credit this woman who's an Iranian woman. Do you see this woman? She's very beautiful Iranian woman.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a whole nother subgenre
Persian
I want to
Jewish?
talk about.
Does she go by Persian Jewish or something?
No, it's a different one.
It's
She's
L.
she's British, but she had a great post about after the woman was like, "We need humanitarian aid. People are going to die of thirst in here, like in Morningside Heights when you can just get Grubhub." And she just said, "You know what they're doing is people all say they're LARPing, but they're actually LARPing as Palestinians now.
What is LARPing?
Yeah, yeah.
Like a live action role playing that they're pretending
cosplaying.
They're cosplaying
Yes.
as that they themselves are the Palestinians. That we are going to die of hunger. We need humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
We need to create an aid corridor. It's amazing.
It's worth dwelling on the details of that because so where Hamilton Hall is, there's 3 food courts within a 2-minute walk, probably a minute if you're booking it. Right, you could just walk out, go get the food that you've already paid for at any point in time.
But they wouldn't let him back in, I don't think, right?
I guess not. But if you're hungry, it's so
You should have brought food. You should have prepared.
disanalogous.
Hello, Mom?
Yeah, it's so disanalogous that you would frame it as humanitarian aid, or that you can have food delivered. No, but they were asking Columbia administration to deliver food or allow the delivery of food.
Yeah.
Meal plan food.
Yeah, which is that's not a service that's provided in normal times, much less to people who have occupied a building. It's like you can't get food delivered from Columbia to your dorm on a normal day. You have to go there, right? So why would they then deliver it when you've occupied a building on campus? It doesn't make any sense.
The woman
so insane.
who said that is a PhD student, surprisingly. And this is the amazing.
Specializes in Marxist poetry.
Yes,
Slutsky.
exactly right.
Isn't her last name Slutsky?
Slutsky, yeah, which was inspiring for a minute. And then I saw the speech and I was like, maybe not. But this is somebody who hates capitalism because they're always talking about capitalism. And this is the ultimate kind of victory of capitalism, that someone can spend $100,000 a year on this. This is one sentence from what her PhD dissertation is. My goal is to write a prehistory of metabolic rift, Marx's term for the disruption of energy circuits caused by industrialization under capitalism, which is what we call in the business babble, absolute useless babble. But this is what this person does. This is our generation, the people that are going to save the universe, are
it's
people who
serious.
can't write a fucking sentence in English.
Well, it's a serious problem that people are taking her money. Like
Yeah, it's a scam.
It's a scam, right?
Amazing scam, yeah. Although most PhD students don't actually pay for their PhD, do they? I mean, most
No,
of
they
them are
get
fund-
paid a little.
They get paid a
stipend.
little. Most of
Yeah,
the
they
funding.
get paid a little stipend.
Yeah.
This whole subgenre of super hot girls who look into the camera and give
Yeah.
like political speeches about stuff.
Yes.
Every one of them convinces me. Some of these people are so hot.
Yes.
And they're so good in the
I
camera.
really
They're so
want to globalize
assured.
the Intifada. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to localize the Intifada.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
There's a few Jewish ones. There's a few Arabic
Yeah, yeah.
ones. They're awesome.
I have to say that Megyn Kelly, I didn't see it, I didn't watch it. I'm going to be on Megyn Kelly's show tomorrow. But on her show today, she took the brave decision
By the
to
way,
say
let
that
the record show, I said super hot, and it triggered Megyn Kelly.
No, Megyn Kelly said on her show today, very bravely, because everyone thinks that no one wants to say it, and she's like, why are all these protesters so ugly? And then she did a whole bit on it. And I'm like, oh, I didn't watch it, so I don't know what she said, but
She made a good use of the word homely.
yeah, homely. Yes, right. Did you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
He said, "Why are they so homely? Like we have to talk about why they're ugly." And I was like,
We need to
wow,
talk about
like,
Kevin. Yeah.
I don't have an opinion on that because I
Oh, I
didn't-
do.
it's like not like I noticed it naturally, but it might be true. I don't know. What do you think?
It seems, I don't know. I don't want to say anything about it.
don't wanna
I
say
don't
it.
get in trouble
I
for
don't
that.
wanna
What is
say that.
with you guys?
Not a lot of models out there. I'll just say that. Yeah.
Well, are we saying that there's some anger or needing a different route to acceptance that's some
You really want to walk me into this cancellation, don't you?
is that, is that, is that,
I
is that
don't
what
know.
It was
is that
Megyn
what-
Kelly's argument.
Is that what
wasn't my
Megyn
argument.
was saying?
I would assume that's what she's
Yeah,
saying.
she was saying that there's some kind of psychological thing that if you're not attractive, you go into this route where an attractive
Yeah.
person wouldn't, which I don't know that that's true. I think in my memory as a Columbia student, I think there were a lot of attractive
Psychos.
protesters and
Yeah.
psychos and so forth. It might really be that the way they dress and everything else is like sort of not to highlight, not to dress in like a typically attractive way. It's like to like not shave your armpits and wear flannels and stuff, and that can create the impression of a crowd of not so attractive people. But it may not actually be true. Like I
I mean, every
don't
woman
think
I've ever
they're-
dated is a complete psycho.
They're-
She's never
they're-
political.
It's mean. It's
never
mean.
have any.
There might well be a psychological profile that fits the protesters, but whether that has anything to do with physical attractiveness is a separate question.
I doubt it.
Now, one more thing. The protests actually, despite the wishes of the Zionists, they really weren't very violent, right? These were not. These were mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah. I mean, ugly in a lot of ways with a lot of the rhetoric. I mean, you get into that game that I see.
Ugly or
people-
homely?
Both. Apparently both. But with the Columbia stuff, you get into this, and I see people trying to parse this. Are these students? Are these people outside the gates of Columbia saying crazy things? Are they within? I mean, it's troubling enough that there are people that gather there and say some of the shit. They like burn Tel Aviv to the ground kind of stuff, which was a chant that some people were chanting out in front of the gates. But yeah, I mean, mostly I can't really tell that they've been super violent.
So if I
no.
was in charge of the protest, I would
Yeah.
say, listen, we're going to play it by the rules. We're going to go out there every day, and then we're going to go back and sleep in our dorms. We're not going to have encampments. We're not going to give them anything that they can use as a pretext to end our protests.
Yeah,
Why did they?
I think intimidation is probably more appropriate than violent. I mean, people who disagree with them, people trying to walk across campus, people who are on the other side of an issue, there's been a lot of that stuff. You can't cross here, which is not for them to decide. But I didn't see violence.
So let me ask you guys. This is what really worries me, and I am very worried, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. I have 3 young. What's the matter, Dan?
I'm just looking at what kind of computer that is.
This seems like a great time for that.
Well, I can multitask.
I have 3 young children who are going to face the world as Jews. They're half Jewish, although they've been converted, which is also ridiculous. Like a rabbi says the magic words and shoots to heaven, whatever. But I'm very afraid that they will have a tenuous connection to Judaism, and I'm worried about them facing a world where it's just easier psychologically for them to break from it. And I made a little list here. I'll try to get through quickly of what I think the future holds, and I want to get your opinion about it, and then what you think maybe Israel's policy should be in light of it. So, number one, the older generation that remembers Israel as a kind of miraculous underdog and lives like I did. I didn't I was born after the Holocaust, but I lived within kind of the half-life of the memory of the Holocaust. All that sympathy for the Jews is basically gone. Much of the country will soon be the immigrants or children of immigrants from cultures, brown cultures or yellow cultures. Can you still say yellow?
No.
That have no Asian, whatever, that have no particular affection for the Jews, and they might even have some cultural anti-Semitism. Further, they see themselves as the Palestinian underdog in that story, and in a superficial way. You know, K to 12 in America resembles more and more, from what I'm hearing, kind of a West Bank education. You know, they're really learning about Israel as being the bad guy, settler colonialism, all that stuff. Intersectionality, which basically teaches axiomatically that white people are the oppressors in any story. The Palestinians, I think it's safe to say, this people would agree, especially after this, will have absolutely zero interest in letting Israel off the hook and making and accepting any peace solution. They smell that they're winning, and if they didn't want it before, which I think we agree they didn't want it before, they'd be crazy to want it now. So I'm imagining that 40, 50 years from now, Israel is still going to be ruling over an occupied people, probably encroaching more and more on their land because of the fucked up Israeli coalitional politics, harder and harder to defend. The images of that occupation will be a steady diet on TikTok and Instagram and everything 24/7 in a way that it wasn't years ago, or wasn't even just a few years ago. Israel may turn more and more to the right as they turn more and more against Israel. And I find it very unlikely that Jews will migrate to the more conservative political party, which will always probably be the Republican. They will want to stay in with the Democrats all the way. So what I'm seeing is that Jews will become Afrikaners, as South Africans were when we were younger during apartheid. Where if you met any South African white person in the 90s, say, where are you from? South Africa. What? South Africa. They lived with shame. Mm. And I feel like that will lead to American Jews basically separating from Israel and possibly Judaism. And I feel that Israeli policy needs to now, in a way that it didn't used to, take into consideration that it may damage the entire Jewish people if it doesn't figure out how to thread this needle. So that's a pessimistic view, but my pessimism has been right for a long time. So what I don't know if anybody.
I don't know if there's a single word of that I disagree with. I think that is probably a likely scenario. I mean, someone posed it to me the other day. They said one of two things is going to happen. Either American Jews are going to move to the right as a result of the blooming anti-Semitism on the left, or the left-wing ideology is going to become less hypocritical, become coherent by categorizing Jews as an oppressed group as well. I said, there's no way that's going to happen. And I don't think that, so I don't think either of those is actually the likely scenario. And I said to him very much what you said. I think probably what will happen is American Jews will increasingly detach themselves from solidarity with Israel, and in order to make themselves acceptable to the American left, which is their immediate social surrounding. The stakes, the social stakes for like an average Jewish American on the left is whether they are accepted in broadly American liberal blue circles, right? That's probably going to feel more real over the next 50 years than whether you have solidarity with Israel, as that becomes increasingly difficult to stomach. In the case of your kids, it might manifest as, like, if they're 20, they'll say, "Oh, what are you?" They might be like, "I'm Puerto Rican."
Yeah.
You know?
And not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. But they kind of have two halves to choose from, and to the extent that one half becomes
they're choosing Puerto
really
Rican.
to the extent one half becomes like unpalatable to the point where they don't have to whisper, "Oh, I'm Jewish." They might just say, "Screw it."
Well, I don't think it's an either or. Either Jews will move to the right, or abandon Judaism to be more accepted on the left. Some Jews will move to the right.
Yeah, but like,
and
what
others,
would be the majority of the trend?
We've already
Will it be
seen
half and half? I don't think so.
We've already seen people we know, journalists, like pretty mainstream Democratic type journalists who've just hid under the table during this entire Israel thing. They wouldn't even make a peep about the genocide charge. I wrote nasty emails to friends like, can you write a fucking column one time just about how ridiculous this genocide charge is? Like, just as without getting too, to digress too much, it just seems to me very common sense that one thing, you correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, you're the expert, that no victim of genocide has ever been able to do was to surrender. In other words, the Jews were going to get killed. They say, okay, well, given to your demands, Nazis. No, the Tutsis were going to get killed. It's not a genocide if there's a war with a war aim where you're holding hostages and you've had an attack, and if you would surrender, the leadership would surrender, immediately everything stops. I mean, there's a million reasons why it's not genocide, aside from the fact that so few people comparatively have died, right? Considering the power imbalance and all that. But just the notion that it actually is a conflict that can be settled, where that's not what genocide is. Anyway, they wouldn't write a single, and it's only going to get worse. So, do you have any other comments?
No, it's an
I have another question, because my next question is it time for Israel to consider, fraught as it is, unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza, even if it means more precarious security situation, even if it means missiles from time to time from the West Bank, and they have to go and just Finkelstein, mow the lawn, like Finkelstein says, right? As horrible as that sounds, and as horrible as that might be a way to live for the people in Tel Aviv, at least Israel will be out from under the label of occupier.
By the way, just to clarify your question, does a unilateral withdrawal include the big settlements?
Yes. What unilateral withdrawal along the lines of the 2007 proposals that Abbas, we basically know what they are. Keeps the old city, give them Al-Aqsa, whatever it is. Take that security risk, because it's not just about Israel now. There is a danger to world Judaism, a psychological. I said this actually on October 8th. There was a war on the Jewish psyche. I don't know if you remember me saying it. I felt it right away. Like, this is going to be very serious. I wrote our friend Sam Harris on October 10th, when everybody was very sympathetic to Israel. I said, nope. I said, buy puts on the sympathy to Israel. We're about to see daily George Floyd videos and a worldwide defund the police reaction. As you know, I've reminded you 10 times already. But I mean, I really did see where this is going, and it's going exactly in that direction and getting worse. So what do you think about it?
I mean, a couple things there is that I always advise people, if you have a certain vintage, you remember this, that America lost the sympathy of the world after 9/11. And it's usually cited, this Le Monde editorial, "We're all Americans now." And I advise people to go and read the editorial, because if you read the whole editorial, it says we're all Americans now. And then about 4 paragraphs in, it's like, kind of like, you guys deserve this. It's in the thing. It's like all this stuff that you heard in the future. It's like, it's always a kind of transitory thing that we're going to be sympathetic to you for a minute. You're actually right about the negotiating and genocide stuff. I mean, it's no coincidence that some of the crazier anti-Zionist types are always pointing out, these Zionist leaders that were negotiating with Nazis, but that was before the war. And the only other negotiation you had was at the end of the war, of Himmler negotiating with giving away Jews because the Germans were losing. That was it. There was no negotiation. It was, as Daniel Goldhagen said, an exterminationist war, an eliminationist war.
That's what genocide means.
That's what genocide means, is that the idea is to exterminate everyone. The only thing I would say about your original question is I'm a little darker than you, is that I wouldn't put it in the future tense. I would say it's all right now. Everything that you're saying is happening right now. You will notice that if you see people with an Israeli flag or the Star of David, you see them in groups of people and you say, okay, there's a protest, there's the pro-Israel side. If you see somebody in public with an Israeli flag patch on their backpack, it's jarring to people now. I mean, that's pretty astonishing to me. That is a country that's in the United Nations that is an ordinary country in so many ways and extraordinary in so many other ways. But when people see that, so another example is a friend of mine who's a very lefty lawyer in LA posted an image from a counter protest at UCLA that she attended. And I sent her a message. The fact that I even sent her a message saying like, oh, wow, I can't believe you posted this. And her response was, you wouldn't believe the response I got. If she or any of my friends, anybody else posted, the sort of standard pro-Palestinian stuff, you don't get any response to that. People just expect it. That's become the de rigueur position. So that kind of idea of associating with Judaism and Israel, and they are not two separate things in the sense that the flag and the symbol of Judaism are the same if you have it around your neck, like, my friend Batya always wears it. I always see it, and it's like right here, a big Star of David. I'm like, oh, wow, you're going out there and saying, fuck it. And I'm like, wait, what? I don't say that about Christians that go out with the cross on. Nobody even notices it. But you're saying, go, fuck it. I'm just going to just be brave about my Judaism. Is that a real thing? Yeah, I don't think they're going to get beaten up. Maybe they will, but I think people look askance at it in a way these days. And I think that's where we are. And I think that is depressing in a lot of ways.
We'd be lucky if we got beaten. The Jewish people would be lucky if they would start beating people up, because then you get some sympathy. I'm not worried about my kids getting beaten up. I'm worried about the psychological, I call it an acid rain. It's like an acid rain on their psyche. What you say?
I think there's a direct conflict of interest between Jews outside of Israel and Jews inside of Israel, because the Israeli government has a duty to people inside. It does have a duty to world Jewry in a sense, but that duty is mainly to ensure that world Jewry survives the threats, the physical, violent threats. Right? That's the reason for existing of the state of Israel. So, someone inside Israel is just going to say, look, this accusation of this Afrikaner accusation of occupier, that has never killed my children. What kills my children are Hamas militants, rockets, and so forth. And that is the duty of my government, to stop that. If that has as a trade-off that Jews around the world are going to be called occupiers, then who cares what they think about?
Well, I think the average
but obviously the average American Jew has the precise opposite incentive, in the sense that your skin in the game is your social status and your the perception of you as a moral human being.
I think, I don't know, but the average Israeli might say, hey, then come here, then live in Israel. I mean, why should we be concerned with making your life easier in the diaspora when the whole point of our country is that you shouldn't be in the diaspora?
They take Puerto Ricans in Israel?
If they're
Very reluctant.
If their father is Jewish, of course
I think
they
that's
do.
a little simplistic. I think they have to take this into account. So it's like an interesting dynamic that they pulled out of Gaza, and then actually the worst case scenario of what people warned did happen in Gaza. Yet there was very little interest in retaking Gaza. People weren't saying the new status quo, even with the worst case scenario having come to be of the missiles and all the stuff coming from Gaza, was not enough to get Israelis to say, you know what, we shouldn't have done that. Let's go occupy Gaza again. That's an interesting thing.
Yeah,
it's like a status quo bias or whatever it is, right? So I could imagine.
Are you saying you understand that psychology? It makes sense, or?
I'm saying that if they were actually out of the West Bank and there was some flare-ups, it wouldn't shock me that they still had the reaction, well, this is still better than
my sense
a totally
is, though,
untenable situation.
That I'm not a military expert by any means, but leaving the West Bank would be far more consequential than leaving Gaza.
For sure.
Proximity to Tel Aviv, the sheer amount of landmass that
The popularity of Hamas, which is higher in
the
in
inability,
West Bank,
probably the even greater inability to prevent things from being smuggled into the West Bank as opposed to Gaza. I don't know that for a fact, but none of that would surprise me.
No, it wouldn't surprise me either. I mean, nobody wants to be an occupation army. In the history of occupations, very few people that say this is a tenable situation for a long period of time. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine Israel wanting, this idea that they want to, Judea and Samaria. They want to take it back, and that's that's popular amongst certain crazy people in Israel. And those people are, more powerful than they've been. But when we talk about sort of consequentialism, well, this is why this happened. You realize why they did this on October 7th. This is always unidirectional, right? Nobody understands why Israel, and no one's there to say, well, you know what? The Second Intifada, before that, you could basically walk from the West Bank to the beach, or you get on a horse and go drive across. And that all happened as a result of the breakdown of the peace process and the Second Intifada, in which over 1,000 Israelis were killed. And I don't think the people that say, globalize the Intifada understand. Maybe they do. If they do, they're psychopaths. But if they don't understand this, I've actually heard somebody say, well, the first Intifada wasn't violent. So that's the one I'm talking about, which is the most hilarious thing in the world. But this kind of idea that the Israelis want to be in this position, they don't want to be in this position. You have to have this thing where, and you think I was talking about the, Star of David and the Israeli flag and things like that, is that the creep of things like divestment, right? It used to be the woman there who did the ad, Scarlett Johansson, did an ad for SodaStream. And the argument was you shouldn't do this because they produce things in the occupied West Bank, right? That is now, you cannot have an association with an Israeli university. We're talking like 1948 lines, Israeli university. Now it's the entire country that is toxic. And that has been pretty successful because you see that shift has not been noticed by a lot of people. It used to be, well, they're doing things in the occupied West Bank. I sent Noam a video a long time ago, and I'll try to find it. It had almost no views. And because the description was in Arabic, it was on YouTube, and I don't know how I came across it, but there were a number.
You're obsessed.
Because I'm obsessed, because I'm mentally ill.
You went through every single video.
Yeah, I know that the protesters are mentally ill because I'm on the other side of mentally ill. But I see it was a bunch of Islamic Jihad or Hamas prisoners that were released and in the West Bank. They were released from Israeli prison. And I can't remember where they were, but they were driving. It was
like Ramallah or something.
It wasn't Ramallah. It was in Jenin, okay, which is a very extreme kind of place within Hamas. And they're filming just this convoy of cars and trucks, and there's in the flap, and they're shooting in the air. They must have expended, I don't know where they're getting their munitions from. There's thousands of bullets in the air. Constantly. Yeah. And then they get to a huge place where the prisoners are there and they're being celebrated and they're shooting in the air and everything. And it's like, okay, well, that's a different type of occupation that I don't think people understand. Is it occupied? Yes, they will go in and they will do these security operations, et cetera. No Israeli troop is going into Jenin on that day. You cannot say that about Poland under the auspices of the Nazis, right? They're not having get out of here because we might hurt you. It's an occupation for sure, and I'm not denying that. But it's a different type of occupation than I think that a lot of the protesters understand. There's a different kind of vibe to that. So when you see that as an Israeli leader, I think there's the idea, which is a very plausible one, that if you pull out, that's going to be that everywhere.
Do you agree with the following? As a purely strategic matter, the people on the Israel side need to de-emphasize, really stop as much as they can, the accusations of anti-Semitism. You have a lot of kids out there who are, again, taught intersectionality or just have a superficial, view of the conflict, and they've concluded they're on the pro-Palestinian side. Yeah. And then they express it, and then they're called anti-Semites. And they're like, fuck you.
Yes.
And then they dig in on
100%.
I think that's probably happened a million times in the past 6 months. And this gets to my earlier point. When I was at Columbia between 2016 and 2020, I don't know that I heard a single anti-Semitic comment, even in passing, even when someone was letting their guard down drunk, right? Whereas every week I heard anti-white comments, anti-white men comments, right? And it's those same kids who categorize Jews as white and only in virtue of that care about this conflict. Mm-hmm. Now you can say it's like, in a way, bigotries always have some story behind them. So you can call it anti-Semitism, but I think it's imprecise, and I think it backfires because those kids understand that they hate white people or claim to or think that they do. But they don't understand themselves as having any particular animus towards Jews. Yeah. And so I think it misses. I think it allows them to write off the arguments they're hearing. Everything after you hear you're called a racist, you basically don't hear. Yeah. That applies to both sides. So I think that's a very important point.
The strategy has to be, and again, journalists need to pursue this. In my opinion, strategy has to be exposing the fact that the other side, the Palestinian side, will not express any deal that they'd be willing to take. That is really, to me, the Achilles heel. And the occupation, okay, they will not ever answer the question, this is what we want. Give us this and we're okay. Unless it includes what everybody agrees is outrageous things. Or right of return, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to expose this whole conflict in a quick way that I think people can understand.
I think that's right. And as someone who has no identity-based dog in the fight, that is the issue that if it went the other way would change my mind about the conflict.
Yeah, me too.
I think many people have expressed many of the protesters have expressed as far as Palestinian leadership and the bulk of Palestinian society. They haven't expressed it. But if you ask the protesters, they would say probably many of them one state, where you know.
Well, one state is not a legitimate request. Israel's a country. You can't ask any country to end its. I mean,
demographically end its existence. I mean, it's a non-starter. But on the anti-Semitism question, I think that I agree with Coleman. I think it's a lot of this stuff is people being accused of anti-Semitism probably aren't and don't really understand these things. I mean, I have seen some people that I know tread close to that, particularly when it comes to money. I saw somebody I know had a post on Instagram and the S in Israel's dollar sign. And I was like, okay, so where are you going with that?
you know Ilhan Omar?
Yeah, we went to college together. But that kind of stuff, it kind of treads that line. But here's the thing that I think is the major material difference. They are sidling up next to a racist organization that is in its charter, in its founding, in its language, in its rhetoric, and in its actions is anti-Semitic. They are, it's classically anti-Semitic in every possible way. It's expunging the Jews. The Jews are devious. They're money grubbers. They steal our land. They steal, et cetera. So when you are sidling up next to those types of people,
responsible for World War I, responsible for
everyone, they're responsible for every war.
Yeah.
I mean, the Rothschilds, that kind of stuff.
Well,
when it gets into that territory, you have to start wondering. And it's not surprising to me. I don't think they really understand it, but it's not surprising to me that somebody would be kind of liberal about their use of the word anti-Semitism when they are actively defending people who are anti-Semites. That's kind of where you're like, okay,
I get
hold
the
on.
reflex. I'm talking purely strategically. What we got to get smart here. There's a serious shit on the line for the Jewish people.
But isn't it the same as
And the
negotiating with
Greenblatts-
Hamas, where, in the sense that you keep conceding things and it doesn't matter?
I'm not trying to concede anything. I'm saying like Jonathan Greenblatt needs to take, I think, a more intelligent view of his struggle.
He needed that before October 7th, too.
Yeah, okay.
I think it goes beyond strategy. I think it also goes to the fairness that you extend to someone like Mate to do that same charity to
it's
really.
also correct.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
also correct. Yes,
Yeah.
which is also usually a good strategy.
Yeah.
Before we get off Israel, now that we've lived with it for a while, Moynihan is usually on the right on this. Do we have to admit that Joe Biden was right about any of the things that he did to put pressure on Israel to change its behavior in any way? Was Israel holding up aid? Was Israel bombing too uncarefully? Was the administration, in your view, because you follow it closely, you know what to right about anything?
Look, I don't think it's wrong to ever use your power to say, particularly, they're doing this for political reasons. I don't think they're looking at maps and looking at video evidence that's coming from the intelligence agency. They're doing this because there is a restless rump of a party that's very angry with it, and the Michigan stuff, et cetera. I think that's the reaction. I don't think it's wrong to say, I think when it gets to Chuck Schumer level, and you're saying the Israelis have to replace their government, that is crazy to me. And that is where you have to stop interfering in other people. I don't care how much aid you give them. That has never been contingent upon we get to decide who your government is. If there was, it would take 4 months to call an election. It's in the middle of a war. This is a crazy thing to say. But putting pressure on, I don't know. You would have to show me some evidence that they have responded, particularly when it comes to bombing, things like that. I suspect it's probably true with Rafah. I suspect it's probably true not only with the U.S., but with the U.K., France, et cetera. When you have a ring of people saying, it's not going to be good for you, if you go into Rafah right now. But I think it's also, we won't know until sometime later that the Israelis are also very smart about this stuff. And they've also said, fuck you, to the Americans since 1948. Every war the Israelis have ever fought, the Americans have told them to stop at some point. And in 1956, they didn't even get involved. They said the Brits and the French, I mean, the Suez stuff, they didn't even get involved in. 67, they told them to stop. 73, et cetera. 83.
And it must be said, when Israel bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactors,
Iraq
the American government was very against it.
Was very against
And
it.
everybody knows now that was the right thing to have done.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not as if, I mean, that runs in the face of the kind of Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt thing that, there's some, puppeteering. The Israelis are always in conflict with the American government about this stuff. So I don't think there's anything new in it, number one. And number two, it might be, I don't think, no matter what Joe Biden said, because I think they know that the America's not going to cut off aid and cut off all this stuff, right? The British have threatened this too. If they knew these are where the hostages are in Rafah, this is the tunnel entrance, we have to send a division in to do this, I don't think that would stop them. I think they probably also are a little, tied up and they don't really know how to execute this at the moment. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I think history will tell, I think.
Yeah, I think history will tell. That would be my short answer. My long answer is I don't know that it's a bad thing that there is the pressure, because I know I'm pretty sure Israel will say no if the answer is no.
Yeah.
So it's not if the pressure is jeopardizing the war effort, I think Israel will tell Biden to fuck off.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I don't think the pressure is a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a little bit of pressure to go further than you might otherwise with humanitarian aid. And
yeah, the aid thing really bothers me because to the extent that it's true that people are hungry, it's hard for me to excuse. I don't know whether it was on purpose or not to make them to make things difficult. We hear stories about people rising up or complaining about Hamas now maybe rising up. Maybe that was part of the Israeli strategy. But however you slice it, somehow if it wasn't their intention to have the Gazan people hungry, then they miscalculated because they had the resources to do it, and they certainly could have asked America for help as well. Say, listen, we can't handle this. We're afraid people are going to be hungry. Can you help? Right? So,
which they are doing. They're building that.
Yeah,
also,
like
bridge to nowhere.
Just like Biden sent out the COVID tests. They arrived at your door just when we didn't need the COVID tests anymore.
Right. But my understanding is that it was never a problem with the amount of food getting past the border. It was always a problem with tons of food sitting places where it's not getting to the people, which doesn't really make sense if it's a conscious effort to keep people starving.
It's also, I think, part of the calculation
Unless
too.
It's super devious.
It's part of the calculation too, is that Hamas leadership has not only said this, but obviously shown it too, that they have no interest in the well-being of the people of Gaza. So if that aid gets into the hands of Hamas and then becomes a tool for Hamas, they don't give a shit if the people of Gaza starve. They don't give a shit if the people of Gaza die.
They kind of want them to.
They kind of want them to. And if people doubt this, you can just look at a Arabic language broadcaster saying, "Why don't you build bomb shelters?" And they say, "Oh, it's not our responsibility." Is there underground stuff in Gaza? The entire fighting force of Hamas is underground. Who isn't underground? The people of Gaza. Do they have that? So if the aid gets to people in the Hamas leadership, what are they going to do with it? They like using the people of Gaza as tools. So it wouldn't surprise me if that distribution is one of the issues.
It's very. Then I cue up that video, Max. It's very easy to say, the left part of the rump part of the Democratic Party was giving trouble for Biden in Michigan. He's had a presidential election, so therefore that's the reason he started putting pressure on Israel. It's easy to say that. It doesn't make it true.
It doesn't make it true. I don't know if it's true.
It could also be true.
Yeah.
That say, guys, you know, this is a bit much. Yeah. This is a bit much. Biden. I mean, just the other day, a comment came out of the White House which criticized the use of the word intifada. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
Intifada is a term of violence. I'm like, good for fucking Joe Biden. Like the Obama administration was never going to have Israel's back like this. This guy, I know that Ehud Barak said that Joe Biden was the greatest friend to Israel of any American president ever. That's what Ehud Barak said. And he knows what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. So it's important to me that the Jewish people be fair to Joe Biden. It's very unbecoming to have a guy who's done so much for you, and then when you find something that you disagree with him about, even if he's wrong, just throw it all away like it never happened. You know, that this is now the only thing that matters is this one thing that we disagree with. Who gives a shit? Everything that you've done so far. That's what I sense. What it looks like to the outside world sometimes. It's a very bad look. It's a very bad look. All right. Speaking of Mearsheimer, can you play? Make sure the volume is up, Max. We always have a thing where we
civilians, as we saw with the Holocaust. So a response is not necessarily murder, is it? It's effectively self-defense.
Okay. Can you pause it for a second there, Max? This was a discussion they were having about war crimes, killing of civilians, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Piers Morgan says, well, you know, how else can you fight a war? Go ahead.
Committing a war crime.
I mean, if you categorize all civilian deaths in a war like that as murder, you're effectively saying that every one of those deaths is a crime. I would not argue that what the Allies did in response to what the Nazis and the Japanese were doing was a crime necessarily. They were responding to an existential threat to the world, including mass murder of civilians, as we saw with the Holocaust. So a response is not necessarily murder, is it? It's effectively self-defense.
The question you have to ask yourself is whether or not you think because the Nazis were committing genocide, because the Nazis were committing mass murder in Europe, that justifies bombing German cities and purposely killing huge numbers of civilians. Do you think that lets you off the hook? That's the argument you're making. You're saying that because the Germans were so horrible, we were allowed to be horrible ourselves, but we weren't as horrible as the Germans, and furthermore, we were doing this in self-defense. That's the argument you're making.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, I understand that there are strategic imperatives for killing civilians, right? This is why we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. We thought that it made good strategic sense and that it would save American lives, especially those GIs who would have to invade the Japanese home islands. But I still think that is a case of war crimes. And I think that to use your rhetoric lets us off the hook.
How does any country defend itself from an existential threat like the Nazis, then by your categorization, without committing war crimes?
Well, if you look at how the Soviets, who were basically responsible for defeating the Nazis in World War II, they did not commit many war crimes in the process of defeating the Wehrmacht. It was basically a ground war where the Soviets, the Red Army, rolled up the Wehrmacht. There were no bombing of cities. There were no dropping of nuclear weapons.
Okay,
now,
that's
there's no
enough,
question
Max.
that there was a lot.
All right.
Unbelievable.
Who
Let me just start and say that I don't know how this guy can profess to be an expert in anything. The reason the Soviets didn't bomb German cities, they didn't have long-range bombers.
Yeah.
That is why they didn't bomb. You don't think the Soviets, who raped their way across Germany, there's many, many books about the mass rapes that were committed, which I think he mentions at some point there too, that they were not committing war crimes. I mean, the Katyn massacre in 1939 was taking 30,000 people from the Polish general staff and shooting them in the back of the head in the forest. To say that they didn't commit war crimes or wouldn't commit war crimes is absolutely batshit crazy. The question you have to ask yourself, and this is the moral question, and I have my answer, it's different for everybody, is that if you're Harry Truman, and there's an argument, I think a pretty serious one, that the atomic bombs, that there was no decision to use them. It was just kind of forward motion after FDR died. I mean, Truman didn't even know about them. I mean, he was informed after FDR died. But this was just going to happen. We had, the arguments have been, you should have had a test bomb. We only had 2 of them, et cetera. But if Operation Olympic, which is the invasion of the Japanese homeland, if you know that 1,000 Americans are going to die, and 140,000 Japanese people, 120,000 Japanese people will die in those 2 days of atomic bombs. What do you do? Do you say, well, it's 1,000 of my guys. It's a lot of theirs. But I'd prefer, the fewer number. But the few number, your guys. The few number, that's your job as the President of the United States, is to protect those people. So what do you do? I mean,
but they were already killing them with conventional weapons anyway.
Well, this is the other thing. The thing about the atomic bomb is it's an idea. It's actually not what happened. It's not what happened on the ground. It is an idea. When you see the number of people who died in Dresden, the firebombing of Hamburg, I mean, more importantly, the firebombing of Tokyo, if you send incendiary bombs over a place where the buildings aren't made of brick, they're made of wood and paper, it's going to kill a lot of people. And I can look up the numbers. I think 100,000 plus died. No one really knows about that or cares about it. It's the fact that it was an A-bomb. That was the issue. So when people say, well, should we have done that? The other thing that you have to look at, and people don't look at this when they're talking about what's happening in Gaza, is what do the people, what does the Hamas leadership say when given offers? When given offers to negotiate, to surrender, to do anything, to release hostages, that's never talked about, but that's the most important thing. What were the big six, is what they called the people within the war cabinet in Japan. What were they doing when threatened? They were not giving up. After the first atomic bomb, they didn't give up. That was 3 days difference. It was the 6th and the 9th. And so
were they given enough time to?
They were given plenty of time when you see a city that's just vaporized.
Well, you said you had your answer
Yeah,
to the
I mean,
question, to the
yeah.
calculus. And so
Sure.
you're saying that
Yeah.
100,000 of theirs is preferable to 1,000
Correct.
ours.
Yeah, that's not your responsibility.
So when I was calling,
If you don't want the 100,000, don't start a war on December 7th, 19.
so I did some research on it too. I tweeted about it. So also, Stalin was conscripting minorities and prisoners, which is, I don't know if it's a war crime. I didn't look up that.
Putin does,
I
too.
imagine it's a war crime, but it's basically killing civilians in a different way, just taking them and forcing them as
Yeah.
into a meat grinder.
Yeah.
But let's say this would have been my follow up to Mearsheimer. Let's say Russia did that exactly as you said. We should not commit a war crime. So, and they began to lose the war, and now the Nazis are approaching Moscow and bombing Russian cities. And if you don't change your strategy, there will be no more Russia. At that point, is it still a war crime to answer in kind? Would Mearsheimer say it's like an impossible philosophy question?
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any. It's probably not fair
don't
to
know.
not give you a chance to think about it. But
No, it's an interesting.
what do you think
hypothetical.
Mearsheimer would say?
I don't know, but the way that I think about wars in general is not just in terms of the actions of the armies, but in terms of what kind of society they're trying to build. And I think that is a very key question. I'm always against war crimes. I think international law is a good thing if you can follow it and make like if we could have beat the Nazis without firebombing Dresden, that would have been better. Absolutely.
That might well be
you're
the
not
case.
going to get me to argue with that at all. You're not going to get me to argue it wasn't a war crime if, in fact, it violated I guess the Geneva Convention wasn't around then, but you get the point. But the deeper point is like what is each side trying to do, right? South Korea committed horrible war crimes in the Korean War. Nobody even doubts that, but they had a different vision of society than North Korea, and I think they were on the right side of that war as a result. And you can see the difference between North Korea and South Korea justifies in some sense what it took to have there be a South Korea, to have it not just all be one communist hellscape. And so that's always a key question. I think Israel shows the kind of society it's trying to build by how it treats its Arab citizens who have the right to vote and sit on the Supreme Court and so forth. We know what Hamas is trying to do. And
Yeah,
that's
it's also-
a very key.
Is that the case that the war could not have been won without firebombing Dresden?
You never know
that's
that.
No,
more
well,
common.
so-
Here's the thing, you never know that in prospect.
Yeah, you
hindsight
don't-
is 2020.
So there's a lot of controversy about Dresden in particular, that it wasn't a military target. I mean, there was a railroad junction there that was important, but was it as important as what ended up happening, which is anywhere from 15 to 30,000 people that were killed? Holocaust deniers love it. Their favorite one, by the way. They have a march every year. The neo-Nazis in Germany, the NPD is the name of the party, and they memorialize the day of Dresden, and they refer to it as Candace Owen tweeted about Dresden recently, which is funny.
We should do a whole show about her.
Yeah, but she said something that is the word that is used in German. If you see the signs from the Nazi marches, it says Bomben Holocaust, the bomb Holocaust. And she referred to it as a Holocaust. She actually used that word when talking about it. So the question is area bombing. This is why it's very weird that he brings this up. It's a very imprecise comparison because when you look at the number of people that have died over 7 months, and let's say it's 20 5,000. Hamas has revised their numbers down. And let's say that 6,000, the Israelis say 12, 13,000 Hamas fighters. But you get down into maybe 15,000, something like that. That was an afternoon of bombing in World War II. That was not, this is over 7 months. So it was literally called area bombing, and Arthur Harris, Bomber Harris in the RAF, that was the idea, was to break their will. And that is true. There is Churchill actually questioned the strategy too. So was it moral? I have really different thoughts about this. And I watched a film recently, which I think is one of the better films I've seen in the past 10 years. And it's called A Natural History of Destruction. And it's made by a Ukrainian filmmaker. And there's no voiceover, and it is only archival footage, beautifully constructed. And it starts on the ground in Hamburg in 1943 of just people going about their business. And then it goes to England where they're making the bombs and just in the factories making them. And then it cuts back and it goes until the city's destroyed. And when you're watching that, you're like, Jesus Christ, that was really an intense way of doing this. Do I know that in particular was the best strategy, the best air strategy? No, I don't, actually. I have a lot of questions about that. But at the time, it's not as if there were other options. It's not as if, softening up these cities was something you could do by drones or by some other means. So it is. I think it's an interesting moral question. I think he's totally wrong to ask the question. I don't think it's appropriate in the Gaza discussion, though.
But in hindsight, is it generally thought that this was helpful, the bombing of Dresden, in hastening the end of the war?
In particular, there's a book by a guy called Frederick Taylor who makes the argument that it kind of was. He's a British historian. David Irving's first book in 1962 or 63, The Holocaust Denier, was about Dresden. And you see the horseshoe theory of the far right and the far left. Ulrike Meinhof, the head of the Baader-Meinhof left-wing terrorist group, very pro-Palestinian, cites in her writing David Irving. Isn't that amazing? Like back then. She says 120, 130,000 people died in the bombing of Dresden because her argument was, of course, American imperialism and, pro-Palestinian, et cetera. But was it a strategic necessity? I think that there's a lot of argument to be made that it wasn't. And I actually tend to kind of think that it probably wasn't a necessity. But the other bombing raids that killed an enormous number of people, and again, this is a reaction, remember, to the Battle of Britain, where not only in the 1940 was absolutely horrible for the people of Britain being bombed all the time, Coventry being bombed, et cetera. But at the end of the war, you have the V-1 and the V-2 rockets being shot into supposed to be the super weapon, which didn't end up that way, but just being shot into England and land as they will. But the British were doing the same thing, because most of Dresden was a British operation. The Americans came in the next day and mopped up a little bit, but mowed the lawn, I suppose you could say. But yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I think there's no answer to these questions, and it bugs me when people say there is. Before I had Ken Roth on the show, I spent a lot of money buying these essays online, JSTOR, people who had written like the definitive treatises on proportionality. And in the end, they're all like, well, you can't really define it. Like 50 pages, you really just have to feel it as you go along. Well, this is really just...
Because they say it's not one-to-one. So when people make that argument, am I going to kill...
It has to be really, really important.
Exactly.
How do you know it's really, really important?
Yeah,
well, you define that. Well, what's the ratio of people? There's no answer.
Yeah.
I also think it's a red herring in the following sense, which is, I think you can go through every single war in history, be right about who the good guys were, and find war crimes done by the good guys.
100%.
Of course.
100%, with no exceptions.
The question...
So,
go ahead, sorry.
if the crux of talking about this is to get at who is on the right side of the conflict, you're having the wrong conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
The right conversation is, what are the aims of each side? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to build?
Yeah, I think that's right. You always see these things when you look at World War II, because all of those events are always brought up by the bad people, by the David Irvings of the world. The Malmedy massacre, for instance. But, they always bring up, think about this. You go to a concentration camp. The Americans went into Dachau in machine gun people that were left that were German, and executed them without trial and killed them. And there's actually film of it, of them killing Germans who were operating the Dachau camp. You and nobody at this table has any sympathy for those people and actually cheers for it in a way. But, is that a war crime? I don't know. I suppose by definition, it probably is. But it's not one that I'm going to lose a lot of sleep over, you know?
So we're about out of time.
I'm about out of bladder control. Has anybody else?
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I don't want to. I'll stay to the end, but I'm just saying it. It's been a 2 hours.
Candace Owens. She is an anti-Semite, right?
I mean, she's treading pretty close, I would say.
Probably. I mean, I don't know
she's
to what
crazy.
extent any of her beliefs are deeply held and won't change, flip-flop again in the next 5 years if the winds blow the other direction. That's
Now, this is
always
a big
been-
credit to Coleman. Coleman, I mean, I guess I can speak freely. Coleman and I, but we were never Candace Owens fans.
No.
Even when she was saying things we very much agree with, and that Coleman very much agreed with. I was like, no, do not hitch your wagon to this woman.
And that my thing with her is that there's people who like used to like her but now don't. But she's always been this way.
Yeah.
There's no change. It's just the issues she talks about have changed with the news, but the way she approaches topics is identical for the past 5-6 years of her.
We went to the same high school, by the way. The fun.
Oh yeah.
Some years
Connecticut?
apart. Stanford High.
Stanford
High.
So Coleman has. We should just before we go. Coleman has a new book, The End of Race Politics. My family owns 4 copies already.
4?
Yeah.
I own 2. It's true. I own the audiobook and the actual hard copy.
Coleman reads the audiobook. My friend
Yes, he does.
Bernie Fabricant listened to it. He said it was
He
very
sent me an email.
mellifluous.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And he had this viral appearance on The View,
Yes.
which made you a hero.
Yeah.
And you want to tell us how that was?
It was. I didn't have too many expectations going into it. I was a little bit nervous because The View is not my audience, not an audience I would expect to receive me well, except that they did. The audience received me very well, but
Just the host.
What was the
Just the
demographic
host.
makeup of the audience mostly?
very diverse, maybe even half black. I don't know.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it was very
Overrepresented black.
Yes.
I feel the same way when I perform in Jersey. Like, these people aren't going to get me. And yet those mooks seem to like me.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And,
So
and did
people,
you notice? Did the black people in the audience feel to be on your side?
everyone in the audience seemed to be generally on my side. Maybe a couple pockets of dissent, but it was people in general were on my side of all races.
And at TED.
And at TED, yeah, I mean, the vast majority of the audience at TED was on my side as well, including people of all races. It's really, really a small heckler's veto of people that get upset when I speak.
We don't really know, like, as white people, what black people really feel about all this stuff. I mean,
Because a lot of black people that would privately agree with me or even come up to me in private wouldn't feel comfortable saying the very same thing they said to me to a white person.
How often does that happen?
Very often.
Yeah.
Very often. It even happened at TED. I had many black people, Hispanic people coming up to me saying they love my talk. I agree with you. But I'm not sure those people signal that agreement publicly where white people can hear, so to speak. And that was one of John McWhorter's points in his early book that I thought was very true, that there's an ethic of, I don't know if Jews are kind of similar in the culture of like there's things we can say to each other that we can't say to the outside world.
But that was the attack on you from this person called Sonny Hostin, basically saying that you're being used by whites. And
she called him a charlatan.
No, some people say that.
Some people-
Not me.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, she called him the equivalent of a black Shabbos guy.
Yes, yes.
But,
Right.
for
But
white
for
people.
the whites.
Yeah.
He co-opted it. It'd be your
Right.
It was a word I didn't think she knew what that really meant.
Yeah,
She's like, you've
yeah.
been co-opted. Like, you were like, by who? And she's like, I don't know. It sounded good.
yeah, that's pretty much what happened.
By the way, before we go, John McWhorter deserves a medal. That guy is a fucking giant. And he gets
agree, yeah.
bigger in my estimation every day. And I mean, I know people say, well, that's just because he's taking the side of Israel. But of course, that does move me. But the way he does it is so, like, that is the fucking column that I could tell you a number of the Steen and Bergs and people, friends of mine that write for, many don't have the courage to write.
Wait, what's the column, the article that you're referring to?
In the Sun Times, in the New York Times op-ed, he's written a few very strong. And he wrote one recently about the protests, and it's just.
And he's a professor at Columbia.
And he's a professor at Columbia. Yeah, I mean, he's just fantastic, brave and clear thinking, and a tremendous
And the bravery of McWhorter in saying these things, and you should really say that it's brave just to make sort of common points. I mean, they're not common points. I mean, he does it very, very well. But he has been doing this since before he had tenure, when he was at like Berkeley, when he was in different places. And he's always been just kind of straight up about what he believes. And you can tell someone that you really admire, and I really do admire John a lot. And I don't really know him. I've met him, I think, once or twice.
He doesn't go on your show?
Yeah, he's been on with Camille. It was a blacks only show. I was not allowed. It was Lowry and Camille.
The evergreen state of podcasting.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It was a day of disappearance for me.
So Camille permitted you to call him black for that one day?
Yeah, when I texted him, I wasn't live on the thing. But no, he's even when I've disagreed with John, because I mean, John is one of those guys that people you kind of your antenna go up when he says, "Well, no, actually, I'm a liberal." This is what people say all the time, but that's actually true with him. I mean, he is a liberal, and he says a lot of things that I would disagree with, and I'm liberal on certain things, and we don't cross paths. And I'm always interested in reading him because he always renders it so well, and I just take him as an honest person. When there's so much heat against you, and you just don't give a fuck, I always take your opinion more seriously.
Yeah.
So.
Should I wrap it up?
Yes. I want to thank you guys, my pals, for coming to the podcast.
Thank you.
Are you staying for Italian dinner now?
I will indeed.
Coleman has a gig.
I gotta go.
Yes, Dan.
Yes, the end of race politics. The
Oh,
case
wait. Mr. Finkelstein. Mr. Finkelstein,
Yes.
could you sign off for us, please? Make sure we know about Coleman's book and your podcast.
Coleman's book, The End of Shabbos-Goy Politics, is available at Amazon and various other retailers who support the occupation. Dan Natterman is playing in New Jersey to those mooks. Go find him. And thank you for joining us.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Bye.